Okay, the final item of business this evening is a members' business debate on motion 15775 in the name of Emma Roddick, celebrating 10 years of same-sex marriage in Scotland. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons and invite Emma Roddick to open the debate around 7 minutes. Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm grateful to all those members who are here to join me tonight celebrating 10 years since same-sex marriage was legislated for in Scotland by an SNP government. 10 years does not seem long enough ago for something so simple to have happened, but I know how difficult it was and how much courage it took for politicians in this place to carry on and do the right thing, regardless of well-funded detractors and entirely normalised homophobia, lesbophobia and biphobia in much of the press and in their correspondence. Many colleagues still sitting around me today were part of that fight, alongside campaigners, lobby groups like LGBT Youth Scotland and ordinary people across Scotland who just wanted to marry the person that they love. Over 10,000 couples have since taken advantage of being able to marry, and I wish them all the greatest joy in their marriages and a very happy 10th anniversary this month to those first couples to embrace the change in law. I found it very moving to hear some of their stories repeated in the last few days, and I want to particularly recognise the work of Andrew Henderson, a sports reporter at Highland News and Media, because I can't overstate how important it is for the media to represent real people, real relationships and the benefits of treating people equally. Too often we see the work of a minority of journalists who are looking to generate clicks and comments through outrage rather than reporting for good. But the coverage that Andrew gave in the Inverness Courier today to Kevin Crowe and Simon Long, the first Highland couple to take advantage of same-sex civil partnerships, is thorough and empathetic. There are reflections in the piece about the challenges, despite the law allowing it, that they faced in getting their partnership recognised, the backlash that they faced from locals who wrote to the local newspaper, and the response of the Catholic Church, which they are committed members of. The step forward in legislation here precipitated other changes, like the Church of Scotland and Scottish Episcopal Church allowing members to conduct religious ceremonies for same-sex marriages. And I know how important it is to LGBTQ+ people of faith to be able to marry their loved one in a way that also reflects their faith, and I hope that more churches will follow that example. I want to highlight one quote from the piece, which goes, "We both recall the days when the expression of our love was considered to be a crime and our sexuality a mental illness. So we decided we wanted to enter a civil partnership on the earliest date allowed by law, which was the 21st of December 2005. When same-sex marriage was introduced, we also wanted to be married as soon as possible. We took our civil partnership documents to the council offices and the registrar changed its status to a marriage, so our marriage certificate is actually dated 2005. And I love that they've been able to have their civil partnership, which was to them a marriage in all but name, recognised in the way that they saw it. I'm sure that there are many out there with on-paper anniversaries that don't reflect how long they know they've been married, and we must ensure that that's not the case for couples in future. Because now we've made it to a decade of same-sex marriage equality in Scotland, but progress is a constant battle and achievements are not promised forever. What is done can be undone. And there are threats to that right, and people who would see it removed, just as there are couples out there in Scotland who still cannot marry the person that they love without official documents misrepresenting their identity, trans people without a gender recognition certificate. And there are mixed-sex couples who may also be LGBTQ+, who are still unable to convert their marriage to a civil partnership if they wish, which is something I've written to the Minister and the UK Government on, seeking to rectify. What I'm saying is there's a lot more to do. And when I lodged this motion, I sat and I wondered for a long time about how the vote would go if it were held today, had we not been able to get that legislation passed. And I couldn't answer with certainty, nor be sure that the bill would actually become an act, because as an LGBTQ+ member of this Parliament, I've seen LGBTQ+ phobia. I've been personally subject to homophobia in the building, and I've heard people say things about others and even themselves that haunt me. So I do appreciate the difficulty of the environment right now in proceeding with making the next necessary progress, despite the SNP's clear commitment and record on it. This Parliament, reflecting that one which allowed same-sex marriage 10 years ago, overwhelmingly supported changes to GRCs for the trans community, and the bill was then blocked by the UK Government. And much of the correspondence that I received during that bill's progress and much of the commentary on social media strayed between transphobia and homophobia very quickly and easily. And it was a reminder of how far we still have to go. And when I was in the Minister's position, the stories of conversion practices that I was told by LGBTQ+ people were harrowing and heartbreaking and even painful to listen to and to recall. So I can understand why we are struggling to make progress on trans rights, on banning conversion practices, torture, which is sadly and horrifically still being inflicted on LGBTQ+ people in Scotland today, and on non-binary equality. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and make any small steps that are possible and call out the behaviours and the speech which seeks to tear down my community and force us back into the shadows. I would rather lose trying to do the right thing than not attempt it at all, and at least the LGBTQ+ community will be certain that we're on their side. Given the new Labour government has shamefully refused to lift the Tories' veto on the democratically reached position of this Parliament on the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, and just last week denied access to puberty blockers for trans youth, I'm sure that the Minister will understand why there's little confidence out there that these are the actions of a government that might take positive steps on banning conversion practices. So I'd be very grateful if she could expand on the current position of the Scottish Government on bringing forward the bill that was planned. And I'll conclude by just reiterating my deep joy for all those who have been able to marry in this country, celebrating themselves and their relationships and having all of that love recognised in law, just as mixed-sex couples could do before. Having seen the often feral reactions to our very presence in public life, I often think that LGBTQ+ people are still just seen as rebels for existing. And I say keep rebelling. Happy anniversary to those in the first weddings conducted, and best wishes to the other 10,000 and the next 10,000 couples who will make use of this important law. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Ruddock. We move to the open debate. I call first Jackson Carlo to be followed by Paul O'Kane in around 4 minutes. Mr Carlo.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and can I congratulate Emma Ruddock on bringing forward the motion today. And what a difference this chamber is tonight. I well recall the absolutely packed galleries, the celebratory atmosphere that there was in this chamber 10 years ago. And I remember when I leave this place finally, that the things I will remember and be most proudly associated with are nothing to do with the Conservative Party. They are the campaign for assisted dying. They were Trish Godman's campaign on wheelchairs, which I remember from the first Parliament I was in. Amanda Coppell's campaign on free care for those who had suffered from dementia at an early age. The campaign for mesh women, but above all, the campaign for same-sex marriage. And I'm the only Tory left on this side of the chamber who was here and voted for that legislation in 2014. In fact, I look across at Patrick Harvey and I think in all the years we've served together here, we've had very little in common on anything whatsoever. But we share an interest in Doctor Who, we share an interest in assisted dying, and we were two of the leaders of the cross-party campaign in this Parliament for same-sex marriage. And I remember the garden lobby being packed to the rafters with people who were here as we campaigned for that same-sex marriage legislation back in 2014. It truly was a transformative moment in the lives of so many people. And of course this Parliament followed. I don't want to upset Emma Ruddock's narrative, but it followed Conservative-led Westminster, which introduced the same-sex marriage legislation in the rest of the country before we followed on by doing so here. I observed then that I had many gay friends. I made the point I am in the Tory party after all. And, you know, plus ça change, plus ça même chose. You know, the world goes on. But 26 years, I said then, I had been happily married, and I wanted everyone in Scotland to have that same opportunity. Now, 36 years happily married, there are over 10,000 couples who have taken the opportunity to marriage. Some of those marriages will have been a success, some will not. That's not the point. The point is everybody had an absolutely equal opportunity to enjoy the benefits of that union. And I'm immensely proud of the job we did doing that. I observe now with Whiteley Wind Farm in my constituency all the opponents that there were of that wind farm and how it would scar the landscape. And yet now there's a generation who've grown up with the wind farm being there, who think nothing of it. And I think it's remarkable that 10 years on, There are a generation of young teenagers or older teenagers now, a little young at the time to have understood their own sexuality, but who, as they have matured in an environment in Scotland where nobody is bothered or questions their right to have the ability to choose what they want to be, where they will be, and the union that they will eventually be able to have. Challenges remain. Emma Roddick identified some of those. My record and conscience is clear on all these issues. I've voted, I think, consistently throughout all the bills that have emerged before this Parliament. And I think all the time of friends of mine from the 1980s, some who died of AIDS, who didn't have the opportunities, who endured an entirely different climate. I can get quite emotional even now thinking of some of those people. And it was one of the key things that motivated me when I came into this Parliament, to be absolutely determined, as a straight person, to fight for the rights of everybody, to have the same rights as I and my wife and so many other people had enjoyed. I suppose the mood that day was genuinely celebratory. People were laughing, people were cheering, people were applauding. They were doing all the things that the presiding officer might consider suspending the Parliament for these days without so much as a drop of a hat. So much that I perhaps introduced a little bit of levity. I thought, well, if you can't introduce a bit of musical theatre into an occasion like this, then when can you? So, presiding officer, may I conclude with these words? And this is for all the gay people. This is for the trans. This is for the bis. This is for whatever. We are what we are. We are our own special creation. And life's not worth a damn till you can stand up and say, I am what I am. Presiding officer.
I think we've achieved another first there, Mr Carlow. I'm going to call Paul O'Kane to be followed by Rona Mackay around 4 minutes. Mr O'Kane.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer, and it's often very difficult to follow Jackson Carlaw in any debate, but particularly in this debate, so I will try. As a child and in my early teens, I was an altar boy. Now, I know that will be difficult for some colleagues to imagine, but I was told that I was quite angelic. And one of the things I liked to do was to serve on the altar at a wedding. And not just because I often got a tenner in an envelope at the end from the best man, but because I actually loved watching up close the joy on a couple's face when they made their vows, when they exchanged their rings and when they were declared to be married. When two people publicly committed their love to one another for life in front of their family, friends and God. And how could you not be moved? It was, of course, a moving occasion, and even as a child, I think I realised how moving that occasion was. Yet, as I got older, I started to think, was this something that would ever happen for me, to me? Indeed, in coming out, I think you ask yourself many fundamental questions. Is this normal? Will things get better? Will I love and be loved? And will I be happy? And the world becomes quite a dark place in some of those moments. And the world was quite a dark place in the 80s and the 90s and indeed the early noughties for gay people. And I think the idea of two men or two women getting married seemed unthinkable. But as I said in my first speech in this chamber, people lit the darkness. Through their campaigning, through their advocacy, and through taking brave decisions in this place and in our UK Parliament. And for me, it was a Scottish Labour government who abolished Section 2A, or Section 28 as we know it, and a UK government who introduced civil partnerships and adoption rights. All hopeful moments on the journey to equal marriage, all hard fought and hard won, and sometimes opposed or frustrated even by those who then sat in this chamber in support of equal marriage in a later period. Because the path to progress is never smooth. Yet in 2014 this Parliament did what that young boy in Nielsen thought was impossible and legislated for equal marriage, and in doing so gave me part of the answer to the questions I had asked myself whilst watching those newlyweds walk out of the church hand in hand to begin their life together. But those questions were perhaps more fully answered for me when I met Alan, I fell in love, and I asked him to marry me. And when we stood there on the 14th of August 2021, I was able to reflect how far we had come. The fact that we stand on the shoulders of all those people who made it possible, but also to reflect on all those who lived in secret and experienced the pain of passing without ever having their love recognised in law and with their families and friends. And indeed, we raised a glass to all of those people at what I must say was quite a party. So 10 years on from that moment in this chamber, as we've already heard, there are thousands of people who have married, like I have, thousands of committed relationships, thousands of happy moments, thousands of holding each other in times of sadness, the odd fight, I dare say. But thousands of our fellow citizens have had their love and commitment recognised as equal before the law. And that is both simple, yet incredible. And yet we know that there are still opponents. We know that in some ways we are going backwards. We know that some still think that faith and being LGBT+ are incompatible and that marriage can only be between a man and a woman. And people often ask me if that makes me angry. And more often than not, I say, it doesn't make me angry, it makes me sad. Sad that someone could look at 10 years of equal marriage and be unable to see the immense joy that those rights have brought for people who love one another, our families and our friends. So we are not going back, because this Parliament has built a sure foundation and there will always be people to stand here and fight for it. And perhaps in closing, Presiding Officer, I will summarise that sentiment better in the words of the great Seamus Heaney, who featured at our wedding. Masons, when they start upon a building, are careful to test out the scaffolding, make sure that planks won't slip at busy points, secure all ladders, tighten bolted joints. And yet all of this comes down when the job's done, showing off walls of sure and solid stone. So if, my dear, there sometimes seems to be old bridges breaking between you and me, never fear, we may let the scaffolds fall, confident that we have built our wall. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr O'Kane. I call Rona Mackay to be followed by Maggie Chapman in around 4 minutes. Ms Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's an absolute pleasure to speak in this landmark debate celebrating the 10th anniversary of the legislation passing same-sex marriage. And can I thank my colleague Emma Roddick for bringing it to the Chamber and for her customary passionate speech. And I'd like to thank Paul O'Kane for such a lovely personal speech as well. The Marriage and Civil Partnerships Scotland Act 2014 legalised same-sex marriage in Scotland, with the law coming into effect on the 16th of December and the first same-sex marriage ceremony taking place on Hogmanay of the same year. So this legislation was passed 2 years before I was elected, and it's definitely a huge regret for me that I wasn't in the chamber that day to celebrate the passing of this joyous legislation, and I'm really quite jealous of Jackson Carlaw being here to experience that. I understand campaigners stood up in the gallery and applauded against the rules of the chamber, and I'm pretty sure more than a few tears were shed too. I'd love to have been at that first same-sex marriage ceremony that took place in Hogmanay the same year. What a celebration that must have been. Since 2014, more than 10,000 same-sex couples have married in Scotland, and that's a lot of happy people who are now able to live and love as they choose. Presiding Officer, there can be few of us who do not know or have family members in same-sex marriages. But as ever, we cannot take equality for granted. We must stop treating same-sex relationships as somehow different, special or exceptional. They're most certainly not, and simply reflect the make-up of our diverse society. My office manager and his husband will have been married 10 years this February. They didn't waste any time in tying the knot after the legislation was passed. They did it, in fact, in a cave in Iceland, and those happy memories of an amazing day are remembered by many of their guests. And now, having adopted 2 siblings as babies, they're living life as one happy, if at times chaotic, family. You could not hope for happier children or a more contented family. This bill, passed 10 years ago, is proof that legislation can enhance and improve society at every level. But as with all issues concerning inclusivity and what can be termed by some as moral issues, it isn't always easy to get past. And that's why so much credit must go to the campaigners who gave so much of their time and energy over the decades leading up to 2014, and those who are still doing it to ensure inclusivity for all in a diverse modern Scotland. They are the trailblazers to whom future generations owe so much. To be able to live and love freely, regardless of sexual orientation, is fundamental to a civilised society. Thankfully, young people growing up today don't see the stigma that existed for many people of my generation. So we must consign discrimination of every kind, sexual, gender, race, disability and more to the dustbin. Scotland is a tolerant, inclusive society, and any form of discrimination must be called out by each and every one of us. So to all the happy couples out there who have benefited from this decade-old legislation, I say thank you for being true to yourselves and for committing to living your life as you wish with the love of your life. You have paved the way to happiness for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mackay. I now call Maggie Chapman to be followed by Jamie Green in around 4 minutes. Ms Chapman.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Emma Roddick for her motion and for securing this important debate, because I wholeheartedly agree that the introduction of same-sex marriage in Scotland is a matter for enthusiastic celebration. But I'm not sure that a characterisation of the past decade as one of love, respect and freedom of choice really tells the whole story. Equal marriage has been, to some extent, the low-hanging fruit of equality, reform with which we feel comfortable, which extends our families and community, gives us more occasions of festivity and provides extra ballast to the institution of marriage. But we are misremembering if we think that it was easy, and Emma Roddick is right to highlight the bravery and tenacity of those early activists. Looking back at the debates in this Parliament, I see some of the same tropes that we've heard recently in relation to the rights of transgender people, about supposed harms to children, none of which have materialised, about regressive beliefs being worthy of respect, about redefinition of words, whether the word is marriage or woman, as if language were not perpetually evolving. It is only in retrospect that reform seems inevitable. Marriage is of deep importance to many, carrying as it does such a rich history of tradition, of romance, of religious and secular connotation. But that isn't what everyone wants. In England and Wales, married couples for whom civil partnership is a better reflection of their personal values can convert their marriage to a civil partnership. In Scotland, they still cannot. The decade of freedom of choice has not delivered for them. I understand that the previous Secretary of State for Scotland expressed his agreement in principle to the Section 104 order that would be needed to bring about that change. Unfortunately, the present Labour incumbent has not yet replied to the Cabinet Secretary, nor to my colleague Ariane Burgess, MSP, both of whom have written to him on this. Perhaps members here this evening could give him a little nudge. Emma Roddick's motion claims that Scotland is one of the most LGBTQIA+ friendly nations in Europe. I want to agree, but I really don't know whether that's true. Yes, we have legal equality and an inclusive school curriculum, but real-life experiences, especially of young people, and especially of transgender people, give us little upon which to congratulate ourselves. Recent reports from LGBT Youth Scotland, compared to those of 5 years earlier, show significant declines in the numbers of young LGBTQIA+ people who believe Scotland is a good place for them to live. Those in rural areas are particularly unlikely to feel valued or welcome, while many feel unsafe or unsupported by healthcare services. Of course, Wes Streeting's devastating announcement of last week, made with neither evidence nor compassion, will have compounded those experiences of rejection and exclusion. A recent project with LGBTQIA+ young people in the east of Scotland asked them to explore their rights under UNCRC and to identify those which were most relevant to their lives and which were not being fulfilled. The right to non-discrimination, the right to be listened to, the right to education and the right to protection from violence, abuse and neglect are all being breached for a substantial number of our young people. This is a matter of deep collective shame and underscores the urgent need for action, including a comprehensive ban on conversion practices. Emma Roddick asks us to stay determined, absolutely, but I say more too. If we are truly to honour the achievement of 2014, we must discover new wellsprings of courage, of compassion, of solidarity and of will. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. I now call Jamie Green to be followed by Patrick Harvey. Around 4 minutes. Mr Green.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I thank Emma Roddick for allowing us to have this debate? It's a great pleasure to take part in it. And my goodness, I thought Jackson Carlisle was about to sing at the end of his speech. Thankfully, he didn't. But I would like to say, and I've never said this publicly in the chamber, but I would like to thank him for his, what I would say, unwavering support for the LGBT community during his time here in Parliament. I know that he will get many of the same messages and emails as I get regarding some of the positions that he's taken on votes in this Parliament, and I understand how it makes me feel, so I can only imagine the same be true of him, and I think it's worth putting that on the record. I also want to start by saying something controversial. I don't think there's any such thing as gay marriage. It's just marriage between two individuals, two people who presumably love each other and they want their relationship to be recognised in the eyes of the law. They just sometimes happen to be of the same sex, because marriage is as symbolic as it is legal. And I say that as someone who is not married. Perhaps one day, you never know. But I think we should reflect that the story of equal marriage in Scotland is co-joined with the struggle for wider LGBT rights. Right back from the two men who first solemnised their marriage in Minnesota in 1971. It took Scotland until 2014, December 2014, to come to the same conclusion. As was pointed out, England, Wales, some 9 months earlier, Ontario, my other family home, in 2003, Taiwan, some 5 years ago, the first country in Asia to do the same, soon to be joined by Thailand next year, which is good. But even Spain and in Greece have embraced equal marriage, and that's in the face of fierce opposition from the church and from far-right politics. Now, back in 2014, Scotland was plunged in the division of its constitution, but it was equally plunged in the division of the issue of equal marriage. I wasn't here, but I do recall something similar, because I sat in a Dublin hotel room the night that Ireland held its referendum on equal marriage, May 2015, and I remember it vividly because I was walking through the streets of Dublin, which were awash with campaigners on both sides of that argument, and I chatted equally with those that were carrying rainbow flags to those who were carrying placards saying that God loved me no matter what. But it was those that I encountered who told me that I was abnormal or an abomination in the eyes of God that I had a problem with. And that night the results came through and it was emotional. I could feel it, because despite the opinion poll saying that 70% of the population was in favour, you never know until you know. And the same be true, I suspect, in Scotland of that night 10 years ago that we've heard so much about. From the petition from Nick Henderson in 2009 right through to 2014 when it became law, 77,500 people responded to the public consultation on equal marriage. Of course, many of those opposed, but many of those came from outside of Scotland, or indeed only participated through the use of a postcard to express their opposition. But at the same time, opinion polls were saying that 68% of the population were in support. And I'm glad that the Parliament did the right thing, and I'm sorry that most of the opposition to gay marriage came from the Conservative benches, but it did also exist in the SNP and Scottish Labour at the time too. We could argue that they were very different times. Well, are they? A generation of young Scots will grow up knowing that they can marry whoever they choose to love off the back of those struggles, because times do change. And if the Church of Scotland can change its view on equal marriage, well, I hope that anyone can. Back in 2014, Ruth Davidson was at the helm of our benches. And that's the same Ruth Davidson who asked me to become a Scottish Conservative candidate, despite my many reservations about being an out gay man in public life. She served, in my view, as a role model that barriers could be broken down both within my party but wider Scottish politics. She reassured me that I could, in fact, be fiscally and economically conservative, but hold true to my own values of modernity, of inclusion and of liberalism, which drove my political tenets. Now, that relationship has been put quite publicly to the test in recent years, and I wonder what Ms Davidson would think now of some of the narrative that emanates from this place, because LGBT equality often feels like anything but an acronym of equals or equal ambitions. I'd be lying if I did not express my fears to the Chamber today that we reached peak equality some years ago in Scotland, because debate is now confrontational, difficult and regressive on so many levels. Marriage is, at the end of the day, all about love, Presiding Officer. and too much airtime is given to language which fuels division, not love. Today's debate will make no headlines whatsoever because it fuels no hatred in a world which is consumed by short-form content of anger and othering, because the victories of this Parliament of 10 years ago that we mark today are the hallmarks of why this Parliament was set up in the first place, to treat every Scot as a human being capable of loving and capable of being loved. If I ever get married, you're all very welcome, and it might very well be a gay marriage after all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Green. I now call final speaker in the open debate, Patrick Harvey, again around 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And like others, I'm very grateful to Emma Roddick for giving us the opportunity to debate this motion today. And I have to admit that I'm perhaps showing my age. I'm going to have to put it in a slightly longer context than just those 10 years. I can't help thinking back to before devolution, because we have a little bit of an easy story to tell of our history since devolution. Before devolution, Scotland still had quite a nasty story of itself. The story Scotland told of itself was of a more socially conservative part of the UK, where bishops wielded block votes and where the queer community had venues in basements and physically hid under the streets in many, many ways. That story of Scotland as a more socially conservative place, in my view, was always false, but it was a powerful story. And before devolution, some of the queer community genuinely had deep anxiety. What would a Scottish Parliament do with our rights, with the legislation that affects our lives? And we didn't know. And in those early days, of course, there was that incredibly toxic and high-profile homophobic campaign by Brian Souter, the head of the Catholic Church, and the Daily Record, amongst others, "Keep the clause, protect our children." And it characterised, that nasty campaign characterised the first few years. Emma Roddick, I think at one point in her speech, talked about what if that equal marriage vote had gone the other way. I've often wondered what would have happened if equality hadn't won out in those early years of devolution, and if the attempt to create a religious far right in this country had been successful. But equality did win. It was tough getting there, but equality did win through. Since then, we've seen civil partnership, great progress at a practical level, but it still allowed certain voices to falsely present it as a second-class status, and that needed to be dealt with. There was immense hard work by campaigners on those issues, and a dozen other major campaigns that laid the groundwork, that made it possible eventually for the Scottish Parliament to vote on equal marriage. Always against opposition from the usual homophobic voices, as well as some from the newer religious far-right organisations from the US that have started to base themselves in this country here. And all through it as well, there's been this context, which I've regularly tried to challenge, but without much success. This context in politics of treating queer people's human rights as a special matter of conscience. If an MSP from any political party wanted to vote against allowing mixed-race marriage, for example, we would call them out as a racist, and I think any political party would expel them and be ashamed of them. But we don't have that level of principle when it comes to queer people's human rights. We believe that it's okay to vote for homophobic laws because that's a special matter of conscience, or at least most political parties do, and I think that needs to be challenged. Throughout the debate on equal marriage, we had to endure amendments being debated which explicitly sought to frame same-sex relationships as less valid, or even to frame LGBTQ people as a threat to others. Not a new idea, not a new trope, but one that was expressed quite explicitly in the Chamber. But again, despite that, equality won through. Tough going to get there, but equality won through. And I think with one of the biggest majorities of any parliament voting on that issue anywhere in the world. at that point. Others have mentioned that the presiding officer had the flexibility in that moment not to enforce the no applause rule, as the campaigners in the gallery stood up and applauded when the vote was read out, and the MSPs stood up and faced them back and applauded them. That, to me, symbolised what the campaigners for this Parliament had wanted, a Parliament that shares power with the people. But finishing, presiding officer, since then, despite many thousands of couples having their special day, celebrating with friends and families, and maybe, if we're lucky, some of them even living happily ever after, we have also seen in those years the rebirth and the reboot of homophobia and especially transphobia on a scale beyond even the nightmare days of the 1980s and 90s, because it is boosted so powerfully by social media, including quite deliberately by the owner of X, who has sought to deliberately turn that space into one in which hate speech is actively promoted and monetised. Presiding officer, we have a great deal to celebrate about the work that was done that allowed that vote to take place and those wonderful marriage ceremonies to take place. But we also need to be clear-eyed, not just that we have further to go, but that we have a hill to climb in the face of the new threats that are being brought to us, including by those who've shamefully used this chamber to attack the idea of LGBT-inclusive education in schools in Scotland.
Thank you, Mr Harvey. And I now call on Cockhouse-Stewart to respond to the debate. Minister, around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a real privilege to be speaking in this debate to mark 10 years of same-sex marriage in Scotland. And I thank Emma Roddick in bringing this debate. And I also note the respectful tone that has been expressed by all contributors across the chamber tonight. It was a long and careful process to improve equality, to respect the rights and views of those who opposed same-sex marriage or had concerns. In particular, we recognised and put in place protections for religious bodies and celebrants who fundamentally disagreed with same-sex marriage because of their religious convictions. Whilst there were other religious and belief bodies who strongly supported same-sex marriage and wished to take part, and more bodies have chosen, following their own careful deliberations, to opt in. The Scottish Government consulted twice, once on the principles and once on a draft bill. The bill passed on the 4th of February 2014, an emotional day. Once the bill was enacted, National Records of Scotland made a number of operational changes, including IT changes. And I do pay tribute to the work carried out by NRS and local authority registrars at the time, which was done at pace. The Scottish Government worked in 2014 on secondary legislation, and this work included working closely with the UK Government to promote an order under Section 104 of the Scotland Act in 1998. This, amongst other things, amended the Equality Act 2010 to protect celebrants who didn't wish to take part in same-sex marriage, and those protections have stood the test of time. The first same-sex marriages in Scotland took place in December 2014. As the motion says, same-sex marriages have been a success. Over 10,000 couples have entered into same-sex marriage since 2014. And the number is higher than mentioned in the motion, as there is a quarterly statistics for the first 3 quarters of 2024. Same-sex marriage has become an established part of society, and there are more countries which take part in same-sex marriage which recognises them. However, as the motion also says, there is still much to do to achieve equality, both here in Scotland and worldwide. In 2019, we pardoned all men with convictions for same-sex sexual activity that is now legal. But in some countries, consensual sexual activity between couples of the same sex remains illegal. What we need to do in Scotland is show we are, as the motion says, an exemplar in equality. Changes can be made to civil law as well as criminal law to further equality, and the 2014 Act was a major step in the civil law to recognise equality for LGBTQI+ people. Emma Roddick asked for an update on the position of the Ending Conversion Practices, and I wish to reaffirm that conversion practices are an abusive and harmful practices, and no one should be coerced to change or suppress their sexual orientation or gender identity. We intend to and continue to work with the UK Government to explore a complementary approach. We are in the early stages of that, following a detailed consultation, the responses of which will be published in due course. The Scottish Government continues to work at pace to ensure a comprehensive and effective legislation is ready to be introduced to Parliament if this is required. Jackson Carlaw made his contribution with his usual eloquence, but Gloria Gaynor said it first in that I am what I am. Paul O'Kane, I'd like to thank him for sharing his experiences and for highlighting the joy and love that has been brought to so many people through equal marriage. Rona Mackay, by recounting and describing some joyous ceremonies, gave us all wedding invitation envy, and I thank her for paying tribute to all the campaigners for equal marriage, and I add my thanks to them for paving the way for all to live and love. Maggie Chapman was correct to highlight the current situation regarding legislation of marriages to civil partnership, and she was well aware that this involves both an SSI to be laid in this Parliament and an order under Section 104 of the Scotland Act 1998 to be laid at Westminster. The Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice has written to the Secretary of State for Scotland, and I urge members in this chamber to take up Maggie Chapman's offer of a wee nudge in that direction. Patrick Harvey reminded us of the pre-devolution times, and they were such dark times for those of the LGBTQI communities. I would reassure him that this government believes in human rights for all and will continue to pursue equality for all. I am proud of the work carried out 10 years ago to reform civil law to introduce same-sex marriage, and I have looked back at Stage 1 debate on the bill, which became an Act on 2014 on the 20th of November 2013, Kevin Stewart, who signed today's motion, said voting for the bill would give LGBTQ people the right to share the happiness and love and, of course, the trials and tribulations that marriage can bring. Jamie Green paid reference to the counsel that he received from Ruth Davidson, and she said that she wanted the right to marry to extend not just to her, but to the thousands of people across Scotland who are told that the law says no, that they cannot marry the love of their life, they are not allowed, and unless we change the law, they never will be allowed. Well, Presiding Officer, this Parliament did change the law. Same-sex marriage was introduced, and it has brought happiness to thousands of couples. I welcome this celebration and I commend this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. That concludes the debate and I close this meeting of Parliament.